So going to the Dudaei Reuven, first I'll cite two midrashim that he brings down, which are interesting to him, which he finds worthy of discussion. And then I'll mention three basic reasons he gives for the sacrifices. And these reasons, which he connects to the midrashim. But the Dudaei Reuven will cite two of the most common explanations of why we bring sacrifices, and then he'll share his own third explanation, which is consistent with a lot of the Divrei Torah that he says earlier to this point in his commentary. So the first is he cites the midrash, and he says, "Kama shemot." This is actually one of his most beautiful Dudaei Reuven's as well. I really like this one. He says that he cites the midrash. How many names did Moses had? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mikulan Eineni Korelecha Rak B'Shem Shenat Lecha Bad Paro. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu had several names, like for example Tuvia, Avigdor, God says the only name I'm going to call you from is the name that Pharaoh's daughter gave to you. As it says, Vayikra Hashem El Moshe. God called to Moses. By the way, this is an interesting question. People are looking for interesting questions to raise at their Seder. An interesting question is, why is Moshe's name Moshe? Why are we giving him the name that Pharaoh's daughter gave him and not the name that his own mother gave him? Moshe was given to him by Pharaoh's daughter. Why is that a name that we're going to give to Moshe? And anyway, that goes back to the Dudaei Reuven. He says, this is very strange. Is this the first time that God called Moshe and the name that Pharaoh gave to him? Because it says, Vayikra Hashem El Moshe. Meaning to say they cite on this portion with respect to the sacrifices that God called to Moshe. And it says that he's calling him by the name that Pharaoh's daughter gave to him. So he says, why all of a sudden does this midrash say this now? He's been called Moshe up until this point many times in the Bible. And at the burning bush, God calls him Moshe. When God sees him at the burning bush, it says, Vayikra Hashem mitoch hasnev vayomer Moshe Moshe, and he calls him Moses from the burning bush. So this midrash should have appeared by the burning bush. Why is it appearing here? He doesn't ask the question, but why is it that God calls Moshe by the name of that Pharaoh's daughter gives him? That's not the question he raises. He wants to know, why does this midrash appear within the context of the sacrifices? Then we find another midrash. The midrash says, this is cited by Rashi, Adam ki akriv mikem korban, when the verse states, when man will bring from amongst yourselves a korban, and the Rashi tells us, citing this midrash, just like Adam, who was created, the first Adam, did not bring from theft because everything belonged to him. So too, you cannot bring a sacrifice from something that was stolen. So the question is that the Dudaei Reuven asks is, why do we have to learn from Adam specifically that you can't bring it from theft? This is a basic idea that we learn out in many different places in the Torah. His offering and not the stolen offering. It's a mitzvah that comes through a sin. What's the relationship with Adam here? Why is Adam specifically being cited in this context? And in fact, it says in the Zohar, Adam ki akriv mikem karban, when a man from amongst you will bring from yourself an offering, the Zohar says not an earlier man and not a later man. And again, this is strange. What's the emphasis on an earlier man or a later man? So one more midrash. We'll just do the fourth one because it's also interesting midrash that the Dudaei Reuven says that there was a conversation between Moses and God. And Moses turns to God and he says, Master of the universe, from all the 70 nations of the world that you have, you're only commanding me about the Jewish people. Why is that? So God says, that's because you made me king. You anointed me king at the sea, as it says. And they say, God will reign forever and ever. So we have a question about this because a non-Jew is able to offer sacrifices. A non-Jew can go to the temple and bring a sacrifice. So why is Moshe saying that this was a commandment for the Jews? So this is very, very strange. So therefore, he gives in this context, he says, first of all, says, let me tell you the two main reasons for the sacrifices. And then he brings his third reason for the sacrifice. Says the first reason, he quotes Maimonides from Moreh Nevuchim, Guide to the Perplexed. If you want to hear a beautiful shir about the Guide to the Perplexed, you'll go to Shaul's shir on Wednesday night, and he gives a shir about the Moreh Nevuchim. So the Rambam writes in Moreh Nevuchim that the main reason for the sacrifices is like a shield from idolatry, meaning to say that Hashem doesn't want us to offer idolatrous sacrificial offerings, so therefore God gave us the sacrifices to Hashem, meaning to say Hashem was worried that if there was no sacrifices being offered at all, we would too easily worship idolatrous offerings. That's the classic answer of Maimonides. Of course, it removes, again, it's a little bit like the Rebbe's answer, is that it removes any inherent meaning, any innate value in it. So the Nachmanides, the Dudaei Reuven also cites Nachmanides, who says that the reason for the sacrifices is that when a person makes a sacrificial offering, and here we go back to what George Johnson was referring to when he cites the concept of smicha, of laying your hands upon the animal. He says that he's demonstrating here his devekus, his cleaving to Hashem. And it's as though he's offering his entire body, his entire sacrificial, his entire essence is being brought and offered before God. And then the Dudaei Reuven explains the two basic conceptual underpinnings of these two laws. The first thing is he's saying that what Maimonides is saying is basically that through the sacrificial offerings, a person is demonstrating that he is committed deeply to God. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. The person is deeply committing to God. And that's the first thing. And the second thing, and meaning saying no other gods, so it's to protect us from worshiping other gods. However, the second thing is to say that we're trying to be one with God, so that this is Nachmanides, we're trying to have this union with God. The Dudaei Reuven from out of left field introduces a new idea, a beautiful idea. He says, let's add a third element, and that is, where do we have this faith in God, and where do we have this desire to come close to God? We have that in the temple. That's demonstrated by the temple. And that's the place where God's presence comes down. What was the temple really primarily about? Says the Dudaei Reuven, the temple was primarily about the education of the Jewish people. This is not written anywhere, but it is the subtext. I wouldn't say it's not written anywhere, but it's a subtext. And the Dudaei Reuven was a Kohen. He writes about the concept of the Kohen. And so therefore, it was the work of the Kohanim that caused the divine presence to come down amongst the Jewish people. Meaning to say, the Gemara says, Kohanim ochlim, the Kohanim would eat from the sacrifices, and then the owners, the people who brought the offerings, would achieve atonement. So every person who brings a sacrificial offering from the Kohen, and the Kohen would eat it, what he's really doing, not only would the Kohen eat it, the Kohen would be getting the hide of the animal, he would be supporting the Kohanim. If this person would have the ability to be partners with the Kohanim. So when we brought the sacrifices, now the Olah offering, to be sure, was entirely burnt, but every other offering, the Kohen would get a portion of it. The Kohen was their teacher of the Jewish people. The Kohen were the 2 weeks a year they were serving in the temple, and the rest of the time they were teaching. They were teaching Torah to their brothers and sisters, to the regular Israelites. So by this person bringing the offering, he was strengthening the hands of the Kohanim, and he was showing that he's a believer in the faith of the sages, and he wants to connect with the Kohanim. And so therefore, he's going to basically bring these sacrificial offerings as a way of supporting Torah, as a way of supporting those who teach Torah, as a way of strengthening those who teach Torah. So therefore, through the sacrifice, the person is bringing the sacrifice to show that he believes that his fundamental responsibility in the world, this is the words of the Dudaei Reuven, is to strengthen the service of God and not to rely on God alone to strengthen man, meaning to say that he's being God's partner. Like Nachmani says that by bringing the sacrifice, we're joining with God. So this is a way of giving the Kohanim a meal and giving the Kohanim a meal which binds us together. So this explains why, even though any nation of the world could bring a sacrifice, this is really fundamentally, says the Dudaei Reuven, the responsibility of the Jewish people, because the karbanos, the sacrifices, we are going, when we would go and bring a sacrifice, we would be giving testimony to the fact that we recognize the way of God and that we have appointed God as our master over this earth. So the person comes to the temple, he brings a sacrifice to support the Kohanim and to support the way that the Kohanim are teaching the Torah. This is really, even though this is given to the nations of the world, it's a very singular task. This is, sometimes you hear Divrei Torah and you think like, okay, it's a very spiritual, mystical idea, but it's not necessarily connected to reality. But if you would think about the sacrifices historically, this is probably the most logical explanation, that they were meant to provide a way of supporting the Kohanim, and not just the Kohanim, but also what the Kohanim stood for, and what the Kohanim were about, which was the teaching of the Torah, and that's that on basic fundamental level. And so then, just to share you one more paragraph that he writes here, that the Dudaei Reuven writes at the end of this, he writes, when a person brings from himself a sacrifice, just like we had said that Adam didn't bring it from theft, because Adam's offering was specific and unique. Why are we giving the example from Adam? Because Adam's offering was specific and unique to him. So when a person brings a sacrifice, what they're doing is they're offering themselves as a way of relating to the Kohanim. They're saying, I am connecting to the tradition. Meaning to say, prior to Dudaei Reuven, most of the commentaries I had seen, I discussed the sacrifice as a way of serving God. But the Dudaei Reuven is discussing the sacrifices as a way of connecting to the transmission of the Torah, as a way of connecting to the teaching of the Torah. And in order to connect best to the teachings of the Torah, a person has to bring of themselves to the Torah. A person has to connect and bring their own essence into the tradition, into the teachings of the Torah. And that's what's going on here. And that's what the Dudaei Reuven is saying. That's why the example goes back to Adam. Just like Adam was singular, we all have our singular relationship with the Torah. We all have our singular reading of the sources. It's a very important, powerful message for all of us for Torah study, but especially as we come near Pesach, that all of us have a responsibility to bring ourselves into the Seder, to make our own study of the redemption story unique to us, to our telling of the story. And that's what Dudaei Reuven is saying in this context. Let me just pause and see if anybody has something to add to this.